Okay, so now that we've got the base color ready to go for this rhino, let's now begin the process of adding some color variation to areas like the mouth and the eyes, and then toward the end we'll work up around the ears. Alright, so looking at some of our reference images, you can see that a lot of these rhinos typically will have this sort of a dark area around the muzzle, around the nostrils, and around the mouth. And you also notice most of the time they're going to have some darker areas around this inner portion of the eye as well as just a few of these little dark areas around the back of the ear, and then just color variation all over. So what we're going to do is really, in this lesson, focus on getting some of this darker area around the front part of the nose, some of the dark areas in the eyes, and then we'll get into the ears a little bit toward the end of this lesson. Okay, so here's our mesh itself. So just to make this a little bit easier to work with, I'm going to go ahead and just hide the areas that we don't necessarily need. Okay, so let's go ahead and just frame in on this area, start to move in. Okay, so let's come in and choose sort of a black color that we can come in and begin to paint with. Now, one thing that I personally find to be a very beneficial way of poly painting is to choose your color and then take your RGB intensity and drop this way, way, way down. 1 or 2 is usually what I find to be a pretty good value to work with. Now, the reason I like to do this is because it gives me much more control as far as being able to sort of blend these different colors together. So even with a very low intensity, you can see how we're getting quite a bit of color in here. So I'm just going to come around just like normal, painting around here, making sure that I only have RGB turned on and no Z add or Z subtract. So several of these overlapping strokes, like I said, I personally find to be a good way to do this. So it gives you a lot more control as far as being able to blend these colors back into the base texture, or this base color that we applied in the previous lesson. So we'll work our way around this front area, come in and start to paint some of these areas around the nostril and along this underneath area of the horn. There we go. Like I said, lots and lots of just these overlapping strokes is going to be a good way to go. Give you the least amount of headache. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that ZBrush really does not have the ability to erase these colors that we're painting on these particular polygons. So if you start to come into an area and you find that maybe these areas are getting too dark, or maybe certain colors are being carried too far back, what you can do is just come in, sample your original color, and now just paint back over with that color. These you may need to come in with a little higher intensity and just paint some of these areas back with your original base color. And that's sort of how we can get around the issue of not having any really undo or erasing capabilities as far as this texture painting goes. So let's switch this back. Again, nice, very low opacity brush strokes. Bring some of these areas in. Let's actually make sure that we have this set to a 100% black. See, I actually was painting with a little bit of a blue tint right there. So we'll come and cover that up. Now, if you wind up with a little bit of color variation in here, which you probably will, just due to the way that ZBrush blends these colors together, in our case, that's actually a pretty good thing, because now we have the ability to have a little bit of this color variation as far as what we would really expect to see in nature. You know, a lot of these rhinos are going to be, walking around in the sand, in the mud, in water, things like that. So they're going to be fairly dirty animals that are going to have a lot of this color variation. And most things in nature will have some kind of color variation. Very rarely will you find something in nature that's 100% flat colored with no variation whatsoever. Alright, so let's come in and color up some of these areas around this inner part of the eye. Again, very, very soft strokes as we move outward to try to blend these together. Alright. So let's focus our attention now on these ears. Okay, frame in on that area. And what we'll try to do is come in and just add a little bit of this really subtle shading to these inner portions of the ears. Sort of help out with the natural shading that we would expect to see from shadows being able to cast in this area. So we'll sort of accentuate those natural shadows with a little bit of texture and a little bit of coloration. Alright, so these inner part of the ears are sort of tricky, so we may need to switch to a little bit lower, or rather a slightly smaller brush, and get in there a little bit tighter. Okay, so we'll try to come in, grab some of these areas down toward the bottom of the ear. Again, this tablet makes this process quite a bit easier because this tablet also has pressure sensitivity as far as the colors go. And so I can start with these really light strokes up toward the top, and then push a little bit harder as I work my way down toward the base of the ear, and get these much more natural color gradations that we would expect to see from light and shadow and things like that. Okay, not too bad. We can always come back and make some further modifications to these colors if we decide to. Like I said, I like to work, as far as the colors go, in much more of a layering process. So I'll start with a little bit, and then as we start to build these colors, I'll probably, more than likely, come back and revisit some of these areas to really get a lot of those color variations to blend together a little bit more naturally. Okay? So overall, not too bad for our initial starting point. Getting a little bit of this color up around the nose and around the eyes, and then finishing up around this inner portion of the ear. Alright, maybe get a little bit of this bottom part of the chin of this rhino. Maybe get down in that area. Alright, very nice. So what we'll start to do in the next lesson is continue with the process of layering some of these various colors over the body.